It was October 15, 2005, in Lafayette, California. Inside her home, 45-year-old Pamela Vitale was found lifeless, with a strange symbol carved into her back. Investigators said the scene was one of the most disturbing they had ever seen. Within days, their focus turned to a teenager from the same community, 16-year-old Scott Dyleski. Scott grew up in the East Bay. He was born in 1988. Most of his childhood was spent in Lafayette, California. His parents separated when he was very young, and he was raised mostly by his mother. People who knew him in school described him as quiet. Later, in his teenage years, he adopted a darker personal style. He attended local schools and had close friends. He also had a girlfriend who later testified in court. These personal details were brought up during the trial by both sides. On October 15, 2005, Pamela Vitale was found inside her Lafayette home. She was 45 years old and married to attorney Daniel Horowitz. The scene showed clear signs of a struggle. The prosecution explained that she had been struck multiple times and wounded with a sharp object. One injury stood out: a mark carved into her back, shaped like an H, or what some described as a double-crossed T. The condition of the home and the wounds suggested she was taken by surprise. Investigators turned their focus to physical evidence. Biological traces tied the scene to items that prosecutors said belonged to Dyleski. Pamela's DNA was found on clothing and other objects. Testing also showed that both her DNA and Dyleski's DNA were on a ski mask connected to the case. A footprint with traces from the scene matched a pair of shoes linked to him. In addition, drawings recovered from Dyleski's room showed patterns prosecutors argued resembled the symbol carved into Pamela's back. These patterns, along with testimony about clothing and other items, became key points in the case. So how did investigators connect him to the event? They combined DNA testing, shoe print analysis, and scene investigation. DNA linked Pamela to clothing connected with Dyleski and placed his DNA on the ski mask. Shoe print evidence matched his shoes. Investigators also pointed to his artwork, which they said resembled the carved symbol. Prosecutors argued that all of this placed him at Pamela's house and connected him to the struggle. Why did they believe he did it? Prosecutors said it started with an attempted break-in. They claimed Dyleski tried to use stolen financial information to make purchases. They believed Pamela may have surprised him inside her home. In court, they also introduced his reported comments and some of his writings, which they said showed an interest in dark imagery and symbols. The defense told a different story. They argued Dyleski was a troubled but non-aggressive teen. They said the physical evidence was not strong enough to prove guilt beyond doubt. In short, the prosecution claimed burglary and harmful intent explained the incident. The defense argued the evidence did not support that conclusion. By the time the case reached trial in 2006, the prosecution had assembled forensic reports, witness statements, and photos from the scene. They argued that Dyleski wore a mask and gloves, entered Pamela's home, and carried out the act. Jurors heard testimony about DNA results, shoe prints, and the similarity between the carved mark and Dyleski's drawings. The defense brought in friends and character witnesses. They also challenged the way the evidence was interpreted. Dyleski himself did not testify. After jury deliberation, he was convicted of first-degree unlawful taking of life, along with other related charges. The judge gave the maximum penalty available at the time for a juvenile tried as an adult: life in prison without parole. His conviction was later reviewed on appeal. The courts upheld the verdict and repeated that the facts supported the jury's decision. Years later, California changed its laws. In 2018, new rules gave some people who had been sentenced to life without parole as juveniles a chance for resentencing or parole. Because of these changes, Dyleski's sentence was reduced to 25 years to life. This made him eligible for parole review in 2030. Public records confirm that he remains in California's prison system today. Now let's move on to a case where a couple became the targets of a 15-year-old they had never met. Daniel Marsh grew up in Davis, California. His school records and friends described him as someone who struggled to fit in. From a young age, he shared troubling thoughts with adults. At 10, he said he wanted to hurt the man his mother had left his father for. At 11, he told therapists about dreams of harming people. He often set small fires. He hurt animals. Once, he even admitted to grabbing a cat by the neck and cutting off his air supply. Teachers, counselors, and a pediatrician noticed a steady pattern. He had frequent nightmares. He had bursts of anger. He became more withdrawn. Professionals tried to help him through counseling and medication. People who knew him later said he could be very charming at times, but other times he seemed cold and unpredictable. The night of April 14, 2013, Daniel left his mother's home in the early hours. He walked through the neighborhood, looking for an unlocked window. He later told investigators he checked between 40 and 50 homes before finding one. That home belonged to Oliver Chip Northup Jr. and his wife Claudia Maupin. Daniel had come prepared. He taped the bottoms of his shoes so no tread marks would be left. He dressed in all black. He wore gloves and covered his face. He carried a sharp tool about 6 inches long. He cut the screen and climbed inside. He waited quietly until he heard snoring from the bedroom. Then he went inside. Both Oliver and Claudia were harmed fatally while they were in bed. Afterward, the scene showed signs that Daniel had gone even further, leaving evidence that he had damaged the bodies after they passed away. He had also tried to make sure he left no tracks behind. Later, he told investigators that the feeling he experienced afterward was very strong and that he wanted to do it again. 2 months went by before his name came up to police. A friend finally went to authorities after hearing Daniel brag about details of the case that had not been shared publicly. The friend also said Daniel had made threats to do the same thing again. That tip led detectives to question him. During interrogation, Daniel was recorded and later admitted to what he had done. His confession, along with testimony from his friends and family, plus physical evidence, led to charges. These charges carried added seriousness because the case involved multiple victims and evidence of severe mistreatment. Why that house? Was it chosen at random? The answer seems to be a mix of chance and opportunity. Daniel checked dozens of houses that night. When he found the Northups' window open, he stayed. Prosecutors said the victims were randomly picked because the house was unlocked. The defense pointed out that Daniel already knew the area well, and the home was within walking distance from his family's residence. That made it an easier target when scouting late at night. The open window was the final deciding factor. At trial, Daniel first pleaded not guilty. Later, he changed to not guilty by reason of insanity. The defense pointed to his long history of mental health struggles, depression, and dark fantasies. The prosecution focused on how carefully he planned, the steps he took to avoid being caught, and how calmly he described everything afterward when talking to friends. Psychologists disagreed about his mental state. Some described him as having personality disorders and traits of psychopathy. Others said he was mentally ill, but still legally sane. The jury ultimately convicted him on 2 counts of first-degree unlawful taking of life and found the special circumstances true. Judges and juries that reviewed the case afterward also found him legally sane at the time. In December of 2014, Daniel was sentenced to 52 years to life in prison. Because he was under 18 when it happened, California law later opened a path to parole under Senate Bill 260. This law says if someone is sentenced to 25 to life or longer for something committed as a youth, they can get a parole hearing after 25 years. For Daniel, this means the earliest he could be considered for parole is decades into his sentence. His case became the subject of appeals and hearings. These were tied to new California laws about how juveniles are transferred to adult court and the retroactive use of Proposition 57. Courts reviewed whether any parts of his case needed to be reconsidered, but in the end, his adult court conviction and prison sentence stayed in place. Today, Daniel remains in state custody. He is serving his sentence in a California state prison. His parole eligibility will be reviewed under the rules for youth offenders. Was he found sane? Yes. Both the jury and later rulings said he was legally sane when it happened. That finding was central to the first-degree unlawful taking of life verdict and to the sentence he receives. Now, how did an 8-year-old vanish from her own apartment complex, only to be found days later in a recycling bin? Adrian AJ Gonzalez, was a teenager living at the Tannery Arts Center apartments in Santa Cruz. He grew up in the same apartment complex where 8-year-old Maddie Middleton, lived with her mother. Gonzalez had a history of posting online about depression and self-harm. Police records also mentioned his struggles. Media reports noted unusual behaviors and interests that caught investigators' attention when Maddie went missing. These details were later used in court as part of the picture shown to jurors and judges. On July 25th of 2015, Madison disappeared from the apartment community. 2 days later, her body was discovered inside a recycling bin. Investigators quickly focused on Gonzalez and arrested him. Police interviewed him on camera, and those recordings were later shown to the court. At first, Gonzalez denied hurting Madison, but then he explained what happened. He told detectives that he had restrained her by the neck in his apartment. He also said he hid her scooter and helmet afterward. In the same interview, Gonzalez admitted that he had made a decision that day to bring Madison into his apartment because of his own intentions toward her. The medical report showed 2 main findings. Madison had suffered injuries from being cut and from being unable to breathe. Investigators also concluded that she had been taken advantage of before losing her life. The official charges against Gonzalez included abduction and related offenses. Why did this happen? Investigators looked at motive in two ways: opportunity and intention. Madison was a young neighbor who was familiar in the complex. Gonzalez knew her casually and also knew her mother. That gave him the opportunity to approach her without suspicion. His intention came from his own words. He admitted that he made the decision that day to bring her into his apartment because of his personal desire. There is no single explanation for why someone commits such act. In this case, prosecutors, defense lawyers, and expert witnesses pointed to his mental health issues, signs of troubling behavior at a young age, and a sudden decision that escalated. Did he show remorse? Not in the way many people might expect. Detectives described him as calm during questioning. Prosecutors said his lack of visible upset stood out. His tone was even and steady, not distressed, even while describing serious events. Defense lawyers later argued that Gonzalez had changed while in custody and was addressing mental health challenges. Prosecutors disagreed. They told the court his calm nature showed he still posed a risk. In 2025, a jury found enough evidence to keep him in custody. Gonzalez was first charged as an adult. He later admitted guilt as the case moved through the courts. But California law changed. Starting in 2019, new rules limited when 14 and 15-year-olds could be moved into adult court. Because of that change, Gonzalez's sentence was handled under the juvenile system. In April of 2021, he received the maximum juvenile term. That meant he would stay confined until his 25th birthday. If he had been sentenced in adult court, he could have faced life behind bars. Years later, Gonzalez went back to court for hearings that would decide if he could be released when he turned 25. Prosecutors showed the original police interview video to jurors. In that recording, Gonzalez explained how he grabbed Madison by the neck and hid her scooter and helmet in his closet. During hearings in 2024 and 2025, Gonzalez testified again. He described offering ice cream to Madison and convincing her to come into his apartment. His words in court, along with the recorded confession, were used to show how he persuaded her, what he did, and what actions followed afterward. After completing his juvenile sentence in 2021, Gonzalez became eligible for release in 2025 when he turned 25 years old. Local prosecutors pushed to block his release. They asked the court to let a jury decide if he was still dangerous. In early 2025, a jury in Santa Cruz County listened to weeks of testimony. They watched the original police interview, heard from experts about the risk of re-offense, and listened to family and investigators. The jury decided Gonzalez should not be released. They concluded he remained a risk. Because of that, he will stay in custody for at least 2 more years. The next teenager explained her act with just 5 words. Words that still haunt to this day. Brenda Spencer was born in 1962 in San Diego, California. She grew up in a modest neighborhood with her father, Wallace Spencer, and her younger brother. Her home life was troubled. Her father was often emotionally distant and not very involved in her upbringing. At Christmas, Wallace gave Brenda a Ruger 10-22 semi-automatic rifle. This happened even though experts had suggested that Brenda needed treatment for her depression. The decision showed a lack of understanding and responsibility regarding her emotional health. In the months before the incident, Brenda's behavior became more concerning. She often skipped school. She showed signs of deep sadness. She also developed a strong interest in firearms. With little support from her family, she became isolated. This created an environment that would eventually lead to a tragic event. On the morning of January 29, 1979, Brenda was 16 years old. From her home, located directly across the street from Grover Cleveland Elementary School, she began firing the rifle her father had given her. She aimed at children and adults who were waiting for the school gates to open. The shooting lasted about 20 minutes. During this time, she fired 36 rounds. 2 people lost their lives that day. One was Burton Ragg, the school principal. The other was Mike Suchar, a custodian. 8 children and 1 police officer were also injured. The incident ended when police surrounded Brenda's home. She blocked herself inside for several hours before finally surrendering peacefully after negotiations. When asked why she did it, Brenda gave a disturbing response. She said, "I don't like Mondays. This livens up the day." Her statement showed a lack of understanding of the seriousness of what she had done. Later, it was revealed that she had long struggled with emotional issues. But her words also suggested detachment from reality and a desire for attention rather than a clear reason. Brenda was charged as an adult. She pleaded guilty to 2 counts of first-degree unlawful taking of life and several counts of causing harm with a weapon. On April 4, 1980, just 1 day after her 18th birthday, She was given 2 life sentences with the possibility of parole after 25 years. During the trial, her lawyers highlighted her troubled upbringing and emotional health problems. They tried to explain her behavior in that context. The prosecution, however, argued that her actions showed planning and intent to cause harm. This led to her conviction. Brenda first became eligible for parole in 1993. Since then, she has been denied parole several times. The most recent denial was in 2025. The parole board explained that she still lacked insight into her actions, had not fully accepted responsibility, and that the seriousness of the incident was too great to allow her release. As of now, Brenda remains in prison serving her life sentence. Her case is often remembered as an example of what can happen when emotional struggles are ignored and when dangerous weapons are too easily available. Now imagine a teenager using the internet not to make friends, but to set a fatal trap. Manuel Guzman grew up in San Jacinto, a small city in Riverside County. Guzman was a teenager when he began using the internet in a deceptive way. He created a fake online profile. The account used the name Rebecca Santiago and included photos of a model from the East Coast. It was a digital disguise designed to trick people. On May 30th, 2011, Eddie Leal, a 23-year-old boxer from San Jacinto, thought he was meeting someone from that profile. He drove his Toyota Corolla to a park near Ivy Crest Drive. Around 2 in the morning, his car was discovered after it had crashed into a parked vehicle. Leal was inside the driver's seat and had been shot several times. He did not make it. Investigators later found online messages showing that Leal had been in contact with the fake Rebecca account right before the incident. Detectives said Guzman had arranged the meeting, and Leal believed he was going to meet a young woman. Prosecutors called the act a thrill-seeking plan. They showed evidence that pointed to preparation. This included chat records, computer data linking the fake account to Guzman, and messages sent to other people on the same night. They also highlighted details such as a Facebook password that included the numbers 187, which is a police code for homicide, and a tattoo Guzman got only days later showing a smoking gun. All of these were presented as signs that the plan was not random. Still, police never located the weapon. The defense focused on that missing evidence. They also pointed out the absence of direct proof such as fingerprints or DNA. They argued that the case relied mostly on circumstantial links. Prosecutors explained that Guzman had created the fake account to lure strangers into late-night meetings. They claimed his purpose was to harm someone for excitement. They presented a timeline showing that chats happened just minutes before the shooting. They also showed he tried to set up meetings with others that same night through the same fake profile. This was used to argue that he was targeting random people rather than someone he personally knew. Did the state have physical proof that Guzman pulled the trigger? The answer is no. The case did not have one single piece of undeniable physical evidence. Instead, it relied on digital records, witness accounts, and the repeated pattern of online conversations. The weapon was never recovered, and Guzman's lawyers leaned on that fact to create doubt. But the jury viewed the digital trail and other circumstantial evidence as strong enough to reach a verdict. Guzman was charged as an adult. In February 2013, a jury found him guilty of first-degree planning to take a life. They also agreed on an added factor called lying in wait, which makes the act more serious under California law. Since Guzman was 17 at the time, the state could not pursue the harshest punishment. California law blocks that option for people under 18. The jury reached their decision after several days of testimony and review of digital records. On October 18, 2013, the judge sentenced Manuel Edmundo Guzman Jr. to life in prison without parole. During the sentencing, the judge said it was one of the most cruel cases he had seen. In the next case, gunfire rang out outside an apartment complex, and a 15-year-old girl paid the price. If you find stories like this important, consider subscribing. Lilron Jones grew up in Oakland's East Bay neighborhoods. By late 2012, Jones already had a juvenile record for a theft. That counted as a prior strike once he was in adult court. It had a huge effect on the punishment he later received. On December 30th, 2012, a little after 3:40 in the afternoon, a group of teenagers and young people were standing outside an apartment complex near Lion Creek Crossings in East Oakland. Among them was a 15-year-old girl named Jubril Jordan. She was with friends and family when gunfire suddenly broke out. 2 people fired toward the group. Investigators later found about 20 shell casings at the scene. Jubril was hit in the head and passed away. A 14-year-old boy, who was believed to be the intended target, was struck in the leg and survived. Prosecutors said the shooting was planned as payback. The shooters believed the 14-year-old boy had played a role in the earlier loss of their friend, Hadari Asghari, months before. What they intended as retaliation ended up becoming a public ambush that cost a young girl her life. So why did this happen? Prosecutors said it was revenge. The shooters thought they were settling a score, but Jubril was not the target. Investigators and the district attorney all confirmed she was an innocent bystander in the wrong place at the wrong time. Jones, along with two others, Vijay Bhushan and Marquise Thompson, were charged for their roles. Prosecutors said the three had a plan to go after the 14-year-old boy they blamed for their friend's end. That afternoon, they drove into the area, saw the group, and opened fire. The evidence included eyewitness accounts, the shell casings, and other details tying them to the scene. Prosecutors described the event as a revenge plan that turned into chaos in a public place. One question raised was whether Jones himself fired the bullet that struck Jubril. Records show the jury found that Jones did personally fire a weapon during the shooting. Because so many rounds were fired, and because multiple people shot, reporters usually described it as group action instead of pointing to one exact bullet. Still, the jury's decision held Jones responsible for Jubril's passing. The trial took place in 2015. The jury did not take long to reach a verdict. They found Jones guilty of first-degree charges, attempted premeditated charges, and several firearm-related counts. They also agreed that he had personally used a weapon. At sentencing, the court handed down a very long term. Jones received a total of 114 years to life. This included enhancements and doubling under California's sentencing rules because of his earlier juvenile robbery record. That meant Jones was sent to state prison with parole eligibility many decades away. News reports at the time described emotional scenes in the courtroom. Family members of Jubril spoke about their loss. Even later, when the case returned to court for procedural reasons, the family said they did not want the case to be taken lightly. But the case did not end there. Changes in California law about how minors are treated in adult court led to reviews. Lawmakers required new hearings for people who were under 18 when their offenses happened. Jones's case went back into review. In 2023 and 2024, Alameda County courts held transfer hearings. The process led to what was called a conditional transfer. That meant Jones could either accept a new plea in adult court or have his case reviewed under juvenile rules. This brought strong reactions, both from Jubril's family and from local reform advocates. So what is Jones's current status? According to the latest reporting, he is still serving his original sentence in state prison. His parole eligibility date is set for 2055. However, because of the new court process, there remains a chance that a negotiated plea could change his situation. In the next case, what started as a simple ride through the neighborhood ended with a 16-year-old boy losing his life at his grandmother's doorstep. On a cold afternoon in January of 2011, a white sedan pulled into the Crescent Park housing complex in Richmond. 16-year-old Tyrus Franklin sat in the back seat with 4 other people. The boy was Gene Deshawn Grisby Bell, a football player at El Cerrito High School. He had just left his grandmother's apartment and was heading toward the gym. Franklin stepped out of the car, chased Gene, and fired several shots. Gene tried to run back into his grandmother's apartment for help but collapsed inside. Witnesses later said Gene did not appear to be a planned target. He just happened to be the first person Franklin saw. Franklin did not deny pulling the trigger. Police arrested him later that same day when they stopped the car. Officers found a small handgun with him. Prosecutors described the act as payback. For months before the incident, Franklin and his family had been in a cycle of fights and threats with a group tied to Crescent Park. Franklin's family reported that shots had been fired into their home. Their car tires were slashed. And on the morning of the shooting, Franklin's 12-year-old brother had been beaten. Prosecutors said Franklin went to Crescent Park that day to settle the conflict. Gene, they argued, was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. The case was moved to adult court in Contra Costa County. During trial, neighbors, friends, and family testified about the rising tension between young people from rival neighborhoods. Franklin took the stand himself. He said he was scared and under pressure, worried about his family. But he also admitted he had fired the gun. The defense argued that Franklin acted in a state of fear and stress. They claimed his behavior came from months of harassment and threats. But the jury did not accept that. They found him guilty of first-degree wrongdoing and added an enhancement because he personally used a firearm. Sentencing under California law at that time was strict. The rules required back-to-back terms, 25 years to life for the act itself, and another 25 years to life for the firearm enhancement. The judge, who appeared troubled by the outcome, had no choice but to sentence Franklin to 50 years to life. At the hearing, Franklin spoke briefly. He apologized in court, saying he was sorry. His words were short and difficult, but he tried to explain his regret. The judge later said that 2 young lives were destroyed that day, Jean's and Franklin's. So, was Jean the intended target? The answer is no. Testimony and multiple eyewitness accounts confirmed he was not named in any plan. He was simply walking near his grandmother's home when Franklin saw him. The case relied heavily on eyewitnesses and evidence that Franklin had the gun at the scene. After the conviction, Franklin challenged his sentence. In 2012, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in Miller v. 7, Alabama, that mandatory life without parole sentences for juveniles were unconstitutional. Franklin argued that his 50 years to life sentence worked the same way. By the time he could first seek parole, he would already be in old age. His case went up to the California Supreme Court. The court upheld the conviction and the sentence. But they added something important: a rule that juveniles sentenced to long terms must have a chance to put youth-related evidence on record. This way, when parole is reviewed later, decision-makers can consider the person's age at the time, background, and maturity. This ruling became known as the Franklin hearing. It did not shorten his sentence, but it gave him the chance to build a record for the future, showing how he might have changed over time. Later changes in California law, such as Senate Bill 260 and Senate Bill 261, reinforced this approach. They allowed parole boards to review long juvenile sentences with youth and rehabilitation in mind. For Franklin, this meant that even though he still faced a 50-to-life term, the system had to consider his age and potential for growth when evaluating him decades later. Tyrus Franklin's sentence remained 50 years to life. By the original calculation, his first chance at parole would not come until many decades after the incident. The next case went cold for decades, until DNA on a schoolgirl's purse finally told investigators who did it. On April 5, 1984, 14-year-old Tina Files left her school in Pleasanton. She took the shortcut she often used to walk home, but she never reached her house. Her body was later found in a drainage culvert beneath Interstate 680. She had suffered dozens of wounds from a sharp object. The discovery shocked the quiet community and left her family with a pain that lasted for decades. Public reports do not list Steven Carlson's full birth date, but records from his trial and old press coverage show that he was 16 years old in April 1984. He lived near the path Tina used to walk home and also went to Foothill High School, the same school Tina attended. Classmates later said Carlson was seen as a strange and sometimes lonely boy. He was bullied at times, but could also bully others. As an adult, he got in trouble several times, including for aggressiveness, substance issues, and an inappropriate act involving a young girl. These records later influenced how prosecutors and judges viewed him. Tina was found with 44 wounds from a sharp object. At the scene, investigators recovered almost no useful evidence, except for her purse, which was discovered hanging from a tree nearby. For many years, investigators chased different leads, but the case went cold. Eventually, advances in DNA testing made a difference. A small red spot found on Tina's purse was tested. In 2011, the DNA profile matched Steven Carlson. At that time, Carlson was already in custody for other charges. That match reopened the case and led to charges more than 25 years after Tina lost her life. Years later, Carlson wrote letters to Tina's family and to parole officials. In the letters, he described what he called a drunken rage. He said he had been angry from being bullied at school and was also scared of getting in trouble with his parents after throwing a party. He admitted that he grabbed a kitchen tool, saw Tina walking home, and things happened so fast. In those letters, he apologized, saying Tina had done nothing to deserve what happened. These letters are the clearest explanation he ever gave, showing a mix of drinking, anger, and loss of control. Why did it take so long to arrest him? Because DNA testing had not been advanced enough in 1984. At that time, investigators did not have the technology to produce a reliable DNA match. The purse and the tiny red sample were preserved, and when modern testing methods were applied years later, the DNA matched Carlson. In simple terms, preserved evidence combined with better lab tools finally closed the case. Carlson was arrested in August 2011. He was charged and later tried as an adult, even though he was a teenager when the act happened. In 2012, a judge decided this because of the seriousness of the case and Carlson's past history. In October 2014, a jury found him guilty of first degree. At sentencing, he received a term of 26 years to life. In court and in media interviews, Carlson continued to claim he was innocent. His defense argued that the DNA evidence could have been contaminated or transferred. They also pointed out that no sharp object or fingerprints tied him directly to the scene, only the DNA spot. Prosecutors, however, relied on the DNA link and the severity of the act as proof. The case moved quickly from verdict to sentencing. At the hearing, Tina's family made emotional statements showing how deep their pain still was. Carlson appealed. In January 2017, a 3-judge panel in California ruled that prosecutors had not proven the pre-planning needed for first degree. His conviction was reduced to second degree, cutting about 10 years from his sentence. He has remained in state prison. Local outlets have reported on parole eligibility and hearing dates. So beyond the DNA, was there other strong evidence? No, not really. There was no sharp object, no direct eyewitness, and no clear physical evidence other than the DNA from the purse. Investigators relied on the DNA match and on old-school memories about his behavior. Defense lawyers focused on gaps in the record and chain of custody issues. Still, the jury found the DNA persuasive enough to convict. That balance, a powerful lab result against limited physical proof, explains why the case was unsolved for so long and why the appeal later changed the conviction from first degree to second degree. In 2020, 6 years after his conviction, Carlson wrote at least 3 letters. One was to Tina's family, one was addressed to Tina herself, and one was for parole officials. In them, he included lines such as, "This letter of my deepest apologies is way overdue," and "I was living in denial for many years, not being able to believe or take responsibility for what I did to you on that day of April 5, 1984. For some family members, the letters gave a form of confirmation and a small measure of relief, since Carlson finally admitted what happened. For others, the letters came too late. They felt his apology, given decades later and after conviction, could not undo the pain. The prosecutor also said the admission was too little, too late, since the family had already lived with the loss for so many years. Adrian Berumen was born in 1995, in Long Beach, California. He grew up in an area where opportunities were limited. His childhood was shaped by financial struggles. Not much is documented about his family life or his experiences as a young boy, but it is possible that he faced challenges that influenced the path he later took. On April 23, 2013, Berumen was 17 years old. Along with his associate, 18-year-old Jose Angel Martinez from Compton, he became involved in the ending of the life of 42-year-old Christopher Waters in Rancho Palos Verdes. Waters worked as a graphic artist and had been hired by Berumen and Martinez for silkscreening work. What started as a disagreement over a business deal turned into a physical confrontation. Waters was struck with a small baseball bat, restrained with an electrical cord, and then his vehicle was set on fire with him inside. His remains were later discovered in a parking lot. His body had been tied at the feet and neck, and the vehicle was burned in an effort to hide what had happened. The main motive appeared to be money. After Waters lost his life, Berumen and Martinez used his cash to pay for a taxi ride and then went on a shopping trip at a mall in Lakewood. This shows that their actions were not only harmful but also planned, with the goal of gaining financially. After the incident, Berumen surrendered himself to authorities. He faced charges for taking a life and for setting the fire. At first, he pleaded not guilty, but as the trial moved forward, Berumen changed his plea to no contest, admitting to his role in Waters' case. This shift came after a long legal process and was viewed as a way to avoid putting the family through even more pain. In December 2021, as jury selection began, Berumen officially entered his no-contest plea to first-degree charges. Judge Laura L. Lasecki sentenced him to 25 years to life in prison. The Waters family had asked for this sentence, stressing the seriousness of what happened and the need for accountability. During the court session, Berumen addressed the Waters family. He said, "I know that my words can't change things, but I am sorry for all the pain that I caused you today and the past few years." Some family members felt his words did not sound genuine. Others believed it was at least a small step toward recognizing the harm he had done. Since being placed in prison, Berumen has taken part in rehabilitation programs. He has worked with inmates who struggle with mental illness at the Twin Towers Jail in Los Angeles. He assisted them with daily needs and medication management. His efforts have been acknowledged by both law enforcement and mental health professionals, suggesting that he has made attempts toward personal growth and change. Up next, a teenager's plan to steal a car turned into double homicide. Adam Serabia was 16 years old and lived in Santa Paula. In October 2002, he was arrested and later convicted for ending the lives of his neighbors, John Ramirez and Joanne Watkins. The case deeply shook the town. Both victims were older, well-known residents, and the act was unusually brutal. Investigators said it started as a break-in and theft. Prosecutors explained that Serabia targeted the home because he wanted to take a car. Physical evidence was left behind, which tied him to the scene. On the night of October 21, 2002, John Ramirez, age 59, and his wife Joanne Watkins, age 55, were targeted while in bed. Investigators described the scene as extremely disturbing. Both had been struck many times. Medical testimony later revealed that the blows were heavy and repeated, and the couple was still alive while the harm continued. The weapons used included a Little League baseball bat and sharp tools, which police later recovered. Red patterns and other physical traces at the home linked the act to someone nearby in the neighborhood. Neighbors quickly learned what had happened. Santa Paula is a small city, and the couple's home was close to others. Police immediately focused on leads in the area. They collected fingerprints, DNA, and other important items. Among the strongest pieces of evidence were shoes found hidden under a bed, which tested positive for one victim's DNA, and a baseball bat with visible stains. These items became the core of the prosecution's case. The main question was why a teenager would target two older neighbors so viciously. Prosecutors argued the motive was simple. They said Serabia wanted to steal the couple's 2001 Special Edition Chevy Monte Carlo. Afterward, he even used the couple's cell phone to call or message others. Prosecutors claimed this showed he did not care about what had just happened. Records and reports stressed that theft was the driving reason, since the car was taken and Serabia had access to items from the house. Beyond motive, the physical evidence strongly connected him to the scene. Investigators found DNA from one of the victims on footwear hidden in his room. A baseball bat from the neighborhood carried DNA consistent with the injuries. Forensic experts also described biological patterns on clothing and a level of force that included dozens of powerful blows. Prosecutors argued these details proved that Serabia carried out the attack and intended for the couple to lose their lives. Even though Serabia was only 16, he was tried as an adult. The charges included 2 counts of first-degree homicide, home break-in, and theft. Prosecutors argued that the acts were either planned or carried out during another serious act, which under California law allowed for special circumstances. During the trial, jurors heard detailed forensic testimony, evidence about the stolen car, and accounts of Serabia's statements afterward. The extreme nature of the case, the physical proof, and the theft combined to strengthen the state's case. In March 2004, a jury found Serabia guilty of first-degree charges in the cases of John Ramirez and Joanne Watkins. A Ventura County judge gave him a severe sentence, life in prison, without the possibility of parole. Because he was under 18 at the time, capital punishment was not an option. The sentence instead reflected the seriousness of the case and the presence of special circumstances. At the time, local officials described the act as mind-boggling. Eric Galen Menendez was born in 1970 in Blackwood, New Jersey. His parents were Jose and Mary Louise Kitty Menendez. Jose was a Cuban immigrant who built a successful career in the entertainment industry. He worked in high-level positions at RCA Records and Live Entertainment. Kitty, once a school teacher, devoted her time to raising Eric and his older brother Lyle. In the early 1980s, the family moved to California. They settled in the wealthy community of Calabasas. Eric went to Calabasas High School. From the outside, the Menendez family looked privileged and successful, but inside the household, there were serious problems that later came out during a widely followed trial. On the night of August 20th, 1989, everything changed. Eric and Lyle ended their parents' lives inside the den of their Beverly Hills home. They used 12-gauge shotguns. Jose was struck 6 times. Kitty was struck 10 times. At first, the brothers claimed that strangers had broken in and were responsible, but suspicion quickly grew because of what happened afterward. The brothers began spending large amounts of money. They bought luxury items, including a new car and a Rolex watch. They also brought in a computer specialist to delete Jose's recently updated will. These actions suggested that money may have been a motive. The prosecution said the act was planned in advance and financially driven. They pointed to the brothers' expensive purchases in the days after the tragedy. On the other hand, the defense claimed that Eric and Lyle had endured years of mistreatment and emotional suffering from their father. They argued that the brothers acted out of fear. Eric told the court he believed his father was going to harm him, but there were many inconsistencies in their stories. Their behavior after the event also raised doubts about their claim of self-defense. The trial began in 1993. It became one of the most followed cases in United States history. Court TV broadcast the proceedings live, bringing details into millions of homes. The jury spent months reviewing the evidence before announcing their decision. In 1996, Eric and Lyle were found guilty of first-degree charges and conspiracy. They were given life sentences with no chance of parole. The case sparked nationwide debate about the legal system, family relationships, and the lasting effects of trauma. In May 2025, the brothers became eligible for parole. This came after a resentencing under California's youthful offender law. In August of the same year, Both brothers went before the parole board. However, their requests were denied. The board pointed to Eric's past behavior in prison. They said he had not shown enough remorse. Eric's lawyer, Mark Geragos, strongly disagreed. He said the process was unfair. He accused the board of focusing only on past actions and ignoring the brothers' attempts at rehabilitation.